We got some new updates on the PS5 Gen 2. A new state of play is being teased that actually sounds pretty realistic. And we have a ton of Last of Us news and deals to talk about, which we are going to start out with. So first of all, I want to give you guys my little review of the first episode of The Last of Us. I actually ended up watching it twice. I was going to wait until my fiance got home from work, and I decided I was just going to watch it and then watch it again with her if I really liked it, and I did really enjoy it. There's already a ton of reviews out there, and many of you have already probably seen the show, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but the first thing I really like, obviously, is Joel and Ellie. Pedro Pascal is awesome as Joel. He's like embodying the character and somehow making him feel like I'm seeing it for the first time. I mean, a lot of this show feels that way, but if you're looking at all of the casting, other than Marlene, who's played by the actress who played her in the original game, Joel is just perfectly casted. Pedro Pascal could not be a better pick. The one that really seemed like it wasn't going to work for me is Ellie, Bella Ramsey. I don't know, there's just something about that casting that initially didn't work, but now that I've seen the show and I've heard her and seen her as Ellie, she is Ellie. I have no issues with that casting whatsoever. And the next thing that really worked for me is the effects in this show, whether it's the like tendrils coming out of that old lady runner's mouth or the effect of the plane crashing into the middle of the street. Just like everything looked movie quality, and I am totally impressed with it. I guess I shouldn't be because it's HBO, but you never know in 2023 how stuff's going to shake out. So I was really happy to see how good the effects are, and just that whole sequence during the intro with Sarah, which, by the way, everything with Sarah somehow hit me pretty hard. It didn't hit me exactly as hard as it did in the game, but I think that really comes down to the fact that I've played this game so many times. I played it on PS3, I played it on PS4, and I played it on PS5. Like, you get diminishing returns after seeing something happen over and over again like that, but it was new enough where it still hit me, and I want to give it praise there. But going back to what I was also praising, the whole sequence in Tommy's truck, absolutely just flawless top to bottom. They got signs in the right spots, they got the burning house in the right spot, the fake out with the car crash when you think it's going to happen, and then the plane crash is what actually happens. That's really clever. Honestly, my only gripe with the entire first episode, which was an hour and a half, and I only had one gripe with it, which I feel is pretty good, because I can be kind of nitpicky, kind of a harsh critic with TV and movies, just if you guys haven't seen my movie channel before. But the one thing that kind of bugged me is the changes that they made to the scene outside the wall where they encounter the guard. In The Last of Us Part 1, the game, it's a lot longer, it's a lot more tense. The reaction to Ellie being infected is a lot better, in my opinion, with Tess, and it was just a little bit rushed. And also, flashing back and showing us the Sarah death scene, I don't feel like that was necessary. It felt like a little bit of overkill, in my opinion, just because in most shows, when you have a moment like that where someone is in a similar situation to something that happened in the past and it reignites that rage, you see quick little flashbacks and then it builds up and shows you that event later in the show. The Last of Us obviously started with that event. We know what happened with Sarah. We know why we know how that situation that's happening 20 years later is similar to what happened 20 years prior. I just felt like it was unnecessary to flash back like that, and I really hope they pull back on that as the show goes on, because I don't need things over explained to me like that, especially when we spent the entire, I think, first 30 or 40 minutes of the episode seeing what happened to Sarah. Like, I get it. I know why that would enrage Joel. But other than that very small criticism, I think this show is off to an awesome start. And if they can meet the bar they set throughout the entire thing, I think this is going to be awesome. And from everything we've been hearing about how they're just extending certain moments, now that I've seen how they're doing that in the first episode, I think they're going to nail it, and I cannot wait for next week. I don't really watch a lot of TV anymore. I mostly play video games and work on other stuff, but yeah, I'm totally invested in the show. And if I had to put a score on it, I'd give it like a 9.5 out of 10. Not really much of anything, if anything at all, to criticize here. I think they did an incredible job. I just feel like the normie catering, like flashing back to the beginning of the episode we're currently watching, that's the stuff that kind of makes me roll my eyes. But, you know, everything else was so good, that's, again, a minor criticism. All right, speaking of The Last of Us, though, if you haven't gotten a chance to watch the show yet and you really want to, but you're looking at the new price increase that just happened on HBO Max and you're like, I don't know if I want to subscribe monthly for something like that, you can actually get a deal right now if you have a PS4 or PS5, or really any device, because it's a code. You can get 30% off of a year subscription of the ad-supported version of HBO Max. I have the ad-free one and I'm already subscribed, so I can't take advantage of this, but the price discount would be from $100 to around $70, which is a pretty good discount because HBO Max, even though they're removing a lot of content, the content that's remaining on the app is actually really good. I mean, Peacemaker alone, that's the best show I watched in 2022, and I go back regularly and watch it. They have a ton of animated Batman movies. They've got Batman the Animated Series. They've got The Batman on there. They've got the Bale Batman movies. They've got so much other stuff beyond DC. That's just the stuff that I usually use the app for. They also have a great show called Tokyo Vice, which I cannot recommend enough. So yeah, I feel like it's definitely worth picking up a year of the ad-supported version for $70. Just in case you're gonna watch The Last of Us, you've got a ton of stuff to watch after. So to get this deal, all you have to do is use the code PSTLOU at checkout, and it'll drop the price again from $100 to $70. If you don't have HBO Max or you've let your subscription lapse, I feel like this is a no-brainer purchase, totally worth it. The Last of Us is going all the way until March, and I feel like that show is worth subscribing to HBO Max for, and then hanging on to that subscription for the rest of the year for everything else they have on offer. I feel like, again, yeah, probably worth it. And this last piece of Last of Us news, I'm personally kind of 50-50 on it, but I figured I should let you guys know. So if you're one of the people out there who has PS Plus Premium and you've been enjoying the 2-hour free trials on games on PlayStation Plus, you've probably noticed that The Last of Us Part 1 did not come along with one of those 2-hour trials. But to coincide with the show's release, Sony has offered up a trial. The reason I'm 50-50 on it is because I just think, again, this should be a feature included with all forms of PS Plus because they're really just selling a demo. I know it's not a separate piece of software like the demos we had back in the day, but you know, it really is a demo of The Last of Us Part 1. And also, this is a great marketing opportunity for them. If I was Sony, I would just make this available for everyone who has PlayStation Plus, just because, you know, PS5s are actually available now. People can go out and get them. I'm sure there's a lot of people who will go out and buy PS5s because of this show. And ironically, they don't have a bundle, which I also feel like is kind of a misstep on Sony's part. Like, having this show come out and be as big as it is, like one of the biggest HBO shows ever, it's probably going to be. You'd think Sony would want to have a bundle with a PlayStation 5 and the game that the show is about right there, ready for people to buy, like on PlayStation Direct or something like that. So A, it's kind of crazy that they don't have that, but B, if they just got a PS5 after watching the show and Sony made a demo available or this 2-hour free trial, that's a good way to get people into that world to see, yeah, this game is very narrative heavy. The combat can be tuned down and there's a ton of accessibility options. It's a lot of fun to actually experience this world because as good as the show's first episode is, and as good as it seems like it's going to be as a whole, I don't think it can really be as good or better than the game because the game is something that you are experiencing and the story itself is exactly the same. So yeah, it's weird to offer this. Sony kind of shot themselves in the foot, I think, by making the 2-hour free trials a PS Plus Premium option only, just because, you know, if they take it out of PS Plus Premium, that devalues PS Plus Premium. And the other benefits you get with it, like game streaming and the classic games, those aren't really all that great. So yeah, that premium tier has kind of been a thorn in Sony's side. And now this thing is kind of coming back again with this weird 2-hour free trial version. But if you have PS Plus Premium and you don't have The Last of Us Part 1, it's probably worth checking out. I hope they also put the game on sale because it is a full-on just one-to-one remake of the original game. It has a lot better graphics, but it's missing some content like the multiplayer. So charging full $70 for that, I feel like still is a little egregious. I loved it. I bought it for that price. I'm going to buy it again for $60 on PC when it comes out on my birthday. But yeah, I totally understand why people aren't vibing with this price. Next up, let's talk about this potential state of play that's rumored to happen between February and March. You know, we haven't had one in a while. We were supposed to allegedly get a showcase at the end of last year. That ultimately didn't happen, as we all know. So people are hungry to know what's going on with third-party games on the PlayStation 5 this year. There are a few games you would expect to show up at something like this, like Street Fighter 6 or Final Fantasy 16, but the one that people are really crossing their fingers for would be this rumored remake of the original Metal Gear Solid that Bluepoint Games could be working on. So if you don't know, there's rumors that we're going to get a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1 and a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. I think that's kind of weird. Personally, I think you should just do all 3 games at that point in order, like we saw with Resident Evil, where we got Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 3 remake, we're getting Resident Evil 4. You know, they're going in order there. So if they are working on a working on a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake over at Bluepoint, I would want them to just move on to Metal Gear Solid 2, because while at the launch of that game, people were kind of like, what the hell is going on? Because, you know, you play as Snake in the intro and then you switch over to Raiden. Now everyone knows that, and I feel like it would go over just fine. And people are looking back on Metal Gear Solid 2 as one of the greatest games and greatest stories in a game of all time. So yeah, I feel like they should go 1, 2, 3, but that's a little bit besides the point because yeah, Metal Gear Solid 1 deserves a remake. I think the PS1 game holds up, but for younger gamers, I don't think they're gonna really put any time or effort into figuring out how and where to play the original Metal Gear Solid. But Solid Snake is one of the most iconic PlayStation characters of all time, going all the way back to the PlayStation 1, right? Like Sony doesn't own him, kind of like Crash Bandicoot, but as we've seen with Konami and Silent Hill 2, which is a PS5 exclusive, Konami's totally down to just work with Sony on the exclusive level here. So yeah, I think if we do see a new remake of the original Metal Gear Solid, it would definitely be from Bluepoint and it would definitely be exclusive to the PlayStation 5. And yes, that sucks for Xbox gamers. I know it sucks just as bad as something like Final Fantasy VII Remake, but you know, all of the fans of Metal Gear Solid are definitely over on PlayStation. Like you have the ability to play most of these games on the Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S right now because the Metal Gear Solid HD collection is back compat, so you can play 2, 3, and Peace Walker over there, and I never see anyone talking about or playing those games over on the Xbox 360, over on the Xbox side of the fence. So I might get raked over the coals for this. I don't really think it's a huge deal for these Konami games that everyone already associates with PlayStation to be exclusive to PlayStation, especially considering you can also play them on PC and PS5s are available now. And as we'll talk about in a minute, we're going to have a new PS5 available by the end of the year. There's just so much you can do with a remake of Metal Gear Solid. Like the game is already so cinematic. I mean, you have Metal Gear Solid 3, which follows a very similar formula where it's linear, but also semi-open at the same time. And I always think of playing Metal Gear Solid 4 and that boss fight that takes place at Shadow Moses. Like there is so many different things you could do with the original Metal Gear Solid to really modernize it. I would really hope though that they get David Hayter back to play Snake. I thought it was kind of cool as like a 24 fan that we got to see Kiefer Sutherland as Snake in Metal Gear Solid 5. And if you beat the story in that game, you'll understand why he kind of has a different voice. But I think we should just go back to David Hayter. Like that voice is completely iconic. And I'd also love to see Sony kind of rebuild or rekindle that relationship between Kojima and Konami. Like I don't want to see Kojima go back to Konami and start making games there again because he's got Kojima Productions. I listen to his podcast Brain Structure all the time, and it seems like he's very happy with Death Stranding and what he's working on with Xbox and Death Stranding 2. Either way, I just want more Metal Gear in my life, and I think it's smart to go back to the beginning and kind of work your way up like we're seeing with Silent Hill, like we're seeing with Resident Evil. Really just show people why they should care about Metal Gear Solid in 2023. And the last thing I have to talk about today is an update on the new PS5 we are almost definitely getting by the end of this year, because Tom Henderson has not only clarified some details, he's given us some new details, and not all of them are great. So just as a quick refresher, Sony is allegedly working on the PS5 Slim to release by the end of this year. The new update we got there is that we'll probably see this thing around September, which makes sense to me because if you look at the PS4 Slim, that's generally around the same time that came out. And with that console, excitingly, people were able to get their hands on it all the way in August. Like they were already showing up on Craigslist and stuff like that. So if this console is real, I don't think we're going to have too long to wait to get our eyes on it. And then secondly, an old report basically made it seem like developers have had this thing for a while, but it's not developers who have it. It's people internally at Sony who have been working on this thing and testing it out. But the reasoning for that I think is good for people like me who bought a PS5 at launch, and it's that this thing is not going to be all that different from the current PS5 we have now. It's just going to be visually very similar, but we're going to have a detachable disk drive. And that's kind of where the controversy is popping up with this thing. Allegedly, this external disk drive that we're going to be able to buy separately will only work with the new digital version of this PlayStation 5. So if you bought the digital version of the PS5 at launch, you're not going to be able to like attach this disk drive and have it on the side of the console like freestanding like you would have with something like the HD DVD drive that Microsoft made for the Xbox 360. And that's obviously, and I think for good reason, rubbing people the wrong way, because a lot of people have the digital edition of the PS5 and in their minds they're like, why can't I just plug this disk drive in to the front USB port because they don't have a USB-C port on the back of the PS5 and just use it like these people who are going to get it and attach it to the side of their new console are able to do it. And yeah, what I really think it comes down to is the fact that Sony doesn't really have a way for this disk drive to plug in elegantly to the current diskless model, right? Like they only have one USB-C port on the front of the PS5, and it's kind of weird to think about unplugging the disk drive to charge your controller or using the USB-A port and the USB-C port. Like they really should have thought ahead on this and installed a USB-C port on the back of the PS5 digital edition, at least from the beginning, because that's how we are going to create the new disc version. We're going to have a digital PS5 that just comes with the disk drive pre-installed. You basically take off the side plate, if all these rumors are to be believed, and then you put the disk drive on, you put the side plate back on, and then you filter through the little USB cord and plug it in the back of the console. But to that I say, if people have the digital edition model already, just let them plug the disk drive into the front. That USB port, I think, is full powered, so it should be able to take advantage of this disk drive, and forcing these people who already presumably had a reason to go with the cheaper model to either sell it or return it and then go buy this new version of the digital model so that they can buy a disk drive later on. It just doesn't feel like a cool consumer move to me, and it kind of lines up with this like boutique premium tone deaf Sony that we've seen throughout the PS5 generation. Like it's giving me flashbacks to the launch of the PS3, which like was crazy and a huge mess. But it's kind of a small controversy because, as we know, the digital edition of the PS5 is selling far, far worse than the disc edition of the PS5. But to throw those users who already bought it out in the cold and give them no option to buy a disc drive, I think that's a little weird on Sony's part, especially when you consider that games haven't really gone on sale on the PlayStation Store like they did in the PS4 generation. Like Sony is saying, hey, you could just subscribe to PS Plus Extra and then play games like Returnal or Demon's Souls or Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut. But I think in the PS4 generation, by now, we would have seen a lot of these games getting a lot cheaper, like all the way down to a price of like $20, and that's not happening. So to give digital edition users no option here to buy a disc drive like the new digital version people are going to be able to do, I just don't really think that's a great move on Sony's part. But, you know, this isn't announced. It's theoretical. We don't want to rake Sony over the coals for this just yet. Let them make the announcement before you get yourself all upset about it. I think that's the smartest thing to do here.